The cameras were already rolling when Senator Lisa Murkowski leaned forward, voice smooth but dripping with condescension. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. With a faint smirk, she delivered the jab that sliced through the room like a knife. Your so-called political career. The words hung in the air. Heavy, deliberate, dismissive. For a moment, silence. The studio audience didn't clap, didn't boo. They froze. Even the anchors at the table exchanged quick, uneasy glances. Was this a slip or a calculated strike? All eyes shifted to Jasmine Crockett. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush to defend herself. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, shoulders loose, the hint of a smile curling at the corner of her mouth. A calm smile, the kind that says, "I've heard worse, and I'm about to remind you why underestimating me is a mistake." The tension thickened. You could almost hear producers in the control room whispering into headsets, wondering if they were about to capture a viral moment in real time. Twitter hashtags were already forming in the minds of viewers. Murkowski's Crockett, so-called career. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Some gasped audibly. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few shook their heads, sensing Murkowski had gone too far. The attack wasn't about policy. It wasn't about ideas. It was personal. And personal blows on live TV always come with risk. The camera zoomed in on Crockett's face. She didn't blink. Her silence stretched long enough to feel like defiance. Long enough for the audience at home to lean forward, waiting. Long enough for Murkowski's confidence to teeter on the edge of arrogance. The air was electric, anticipation humming like static before a storm. Everyone knew a response was coming. The only question was how hard, how sharp, how devastating it would be. And when Crockett finally leaned in to speak, her voice was measured, steady, carrying the weight of something bigger than a debate. Cliffhanger. But what Jasmine said next would flip the debate upside down. The debate stage wasn't just another venue for policy talk. It was a pressure cooker, glowing under hot lights, with millions of eyes watching live. The theme for the night, democracy, leadership, and the uncertain road ahead, demanded gravitas. And Lisa Murkowski, the veteran senator, carried herself as if she had a monopoly on it. Every gesture, every word from Murkowski radiated authority. She didn't just sit at her podium, she occupied it like a throne. When she spoke of decades of public service, it was less about humility and more about cementing her status as the voice of experience. To her, this wasn't a debate, it was an opportunity to remind everyone that she was the steady hand in a storm, the seasoned captain steering the ship of state. But across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, younger, hungrier, and unshaken by the theatrics of prestige. Crockett represented something Murkowski couldn't. The outsider who clawed her way into the halls of power without family legacies or establishment blessings. She was not supposed to be here, not supposed to carry the authority to spar with a senator whose last name had long echoed in Alaskan politics. And yet, here she was. That's why this moment mattered. The stage wasn't only lit for a clash of policy positions, it was set for a generational showdown. The old guard, with its polished scripts and unshakable connections, against the new wave, shaped by lived struggle and unfiltered truth. It wasn't just two women arguing about democracy. It was two visions of America colliding, one that sought to preserve what was, and one that dared to claim what could be. The audience sensed it. You could see it in the way heads tilted slightly, listening not just for answers but for authenticity. Murkowski's appeal rested on tradition, on the comfort of continuity. But Crockett's presence itself was disruptive, a reminder that the very idea of who gets to define leadership was up for grabs. And make no mistake, the stakes were enormous. Every sharp exchange, every flash of emotion had the power to shift narratives beyond that room. Political commentators were already drafting headlines in their minds. Was this the night Murkowski would reaffirm her dominance? Or would Crockett, the so-called outsider, break through the establishment wall with one decisive blow? Viewers at home leaned in, not wanting to miss a word. Twitter feeds buzzed. Live stream chats flooded with fire emojis, predictions, and partisanship. Some tuned in for the drama, others for the policy. But all of them understood one thing. This wasn't just a debate, it was a test of who truly held the future in their voice. The stakes weren't about who scored more points on policy minutia. They were about perception, credibility, the invisible balance of respect and authority that could tilt in an instant. Because in politics, as in life, the perception of strength can be more powerful than strength itself. FOMO line. This wasn't just a debate, it was a battle over who defines the future of American politics. To understand the weight of the moment on the debate stage, you have to understand Lisa Murkowski, not just the senator, but the symbol. She is one of the longest-serving Republican senators in Washington, first appointed in 2002, inheriting a seat that her father once held. In Alaska, politics has often felt less like a contest and more like a dynasty, and the Murkowski name has carried a gravity all its own. Her story is one of survival. Murkowski has weathered political storms that would have ended other careers. She lost her party's primary in 2010 to a Tea Party challenger, and then stunned the political world by winning the general election anyway as a write-in candidate, a feat few thought possible. She has balanced on a tightrope for years, Republican enough to hold her seat, moderate enough to appeal to independents, and establishment enough to keep her committee posts and clout intact. In a Senate often consumed by bombast, she cultivated a reputation as steady, pragmatic to a fault. But embedded in that longevity is something else. A certain entitlement, a quiet confidence that her experience is not just valuable, but indispensable. On the debate stage, when Murkowski spoke, it was as though she believed she was lending legitimacy to the very event. Her words carried the subtext of a gatekeeper, the sense that without her, the conversation itself lacked weight. Her establishment ties ran deep. Corporate donors, Alaskan power brokers, and a Rolodex that stretched across Washington had long been her invisible armor. And for years, it worked. Murkowski learned how to play the system, how to outlast challengers, how to cultivate the image of a survivor. She was not flashy, not bombastic, but unyielding. She didn't need to shout. She relied on the assumption that her voice mattered more because it came from the Senate floor. And that is where the seeds of arrogance took root. Murkowski often spoke of bipartisanship, of the importance of consensus, but those words were delivered from a pedestal. To her, experience wasn't just a credential, it was the dividing line between legitimacy and irrelevance. The unspoken message to newcomers like Jasmine Crockett was simple. You may have passion, but I have permanence. That framing shaped the atmosphere of the debate. When Murkowski lobbed her jab, your so-called political career, it wasn't just a line. It was the embodiment of years spent reinforcing her role as arbiter, as judge of who was real and who was merely temporary. But history has a way of humbling even the most entrenched figures. Political dynasties fall. Establishment walls crack. What Murkowski perhaps underestimated was that the same stubborn independence that had once made her a survivor could be turned against her. Her aura of invincibility was built on past victories, but past victories don't guarantee future dominance. And there was another truth lurking beneath the polished veneer of establishment power. The voters who once rallied to her side had grown restless. A new generation no longer saw seniority as strength, but as stagnation. For them, Washington's permanence was the problem, not the solution. That is what made her clash with Crockett so dangerous. By dismissing her opponent, Murkowski thought she was reinforcing the natural order, the seasoned senator brushing off the upstart. But instead, she was setting the stage for a reversal she could not anticipate. In her eyes, Crockett was an interloper, someone whose legitimacy had to be measured against her own. What Murkowski didn't realize was that in trying to diminish her rival, she was amplifying her voice. Her career, impressive as it was, became a double-edged sword in that moment. The more she leaned on her record, the more she embodied the establishment Crockett supporters wanted to challenge. Her hubris wasn't loud or theatrical. It was subtler, woven into the confidence of a woman who believed she had already outlasted every storm. But every empire of entitlement eventually meets a challenger it cannot predict. And in that debate, for the first time in a long time, Lisa Murkowski's confidence looked less like stability and more like vulnerability. Before the spotlight, before the fiery exchanges that would capture national headlines, Jasmine Crockett's story was one of grit, service, and relentless defiance against the odds. Born and raised far from the polished marble of the Capitol, Crockett's roots were planted in communities where politics wasn't a spectacle, it was survival. Her early life shaped a perspective few in Washington could claim. She didn't just study the law. She lived in the spaces where the law determined whether families thrived or fractured. Crockett's journey into law wasn't about prestige or climbing a social. The effect was immediate. Murkowski's composure faltered. Her carefully constructed smirk twitched. She opened her mouth, tried to interject, but the cadence of Crockett's delivery allowed no interruption. Every syllable landed with precision. Every sentence dismantled the assumption that authority could be commanded solely by tenure. Crockett's rhetoric moved from principle to specific achievements. She cited her legislative victories, her community initiatives, her courtroom battles that defended the disenfranchised. Each example wasn't boastful. It was declarative, a record of action, of courage, of accountability that spoke louder than any years served in a chamber lined with plaques and portraits. Moderators blinked, searching for a way to regain control, but the narrative had already shifted. The moment was no longer a contest of personalities. It was a testament to merit, to authenticity, to lived experience. Murkowski's own arguments, built on the pillars of experience and hierarchy, were now being mirrored back at her, revealing the cracks in the pedestal she had so carefully constructed. And then came the line that would ignite headlines. Crockett leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice for maximum impact. "Experience is valuable," she said, almost conversationally. "But it does not grant the right to dismiss anyone's voice. And if a career built on true service can be belittled in a single sentence, then perhaps it is time we reconsider what we value in leadership." The audience erupted not in applause yet, but in visible, palpable shock. Some murmured, some gasped, some stared in disbelief. On social media, clips began to circulate before the segment had even ended, the hashtag Crockett mic drop trending within minutes. Murkowski's lips parted, stammering for a response. Her carefully honed lines of authority and dismissal felt suddenly hollow. The veteran politician, once so commanding, appeared vulnerable in ways rarely captured on national television. Her smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Crockett's calm intensity didn't waver. She allowed another deliberate pause, cinematic, masterful, before landing the final blow of the segment. Leadership is not inherited. Authority is not demanded. Respect is earned. And anyone who cannot see that is already behind. The moderators, trained to mediate chaos, sat frozen for a beat longer than necessary. The cameras, like the nation itself, captured the moment perfectly. Clips of the exchange would dominate headlines, trending stories, and endless replays. The viral moment wasn't a shout, or an insult, or theatrics. It was a controlled, measured, devastating display of authority rooted in integrity and courage. By the time Murkowski found her voice again, the damage was done. Crockett had flipped the script, reversed expectations, and seized control of the narrative. The underdog had become the force defining the conversation, leaving the establishment figure visibly rattled, off balance, and questioning the certainty of her own authority. And across the country, viewers understood it instinctively. This wasn't just a debate victory. This was history unfolding in real time. Cliffhanger. Even the legal experts brought to back Murkowski were stunned into silence. And what happened next would make the entire nation witness the consequences of underestimating resilience. The debate ended, but the impact had only just begun. Within minutes, screens across the country were flooded with clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm, precise takedown. The hashtags exploded. Crockett mic drop. Resilience over arrogance. Underdog rising. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, every platform buzzed as millions replayed the moment, dissecting every word, every pause, every deliberate glance. News outlets scrambled to catch up. Some framed it as a historic clash of political generations, others as the night an underdog defied the establishment. Conservative commentators, initially poised to highlight Murkowski's seasoned authority, began hedging their praise. Even Murkowski's own allies, longtime aides, trusted strategists, donors were forced to admit what no one wanted to say aloud: Crockett had won the night. Legal experts weighed in with uncharacteristic candor. Analysts dissected the exchange, pointing out how Crockett had turned Murkowski's words against her. how she leveraged past statements to expose contradictions, and how her measured, calm delivery amplified the contrast between principle and entitlement. The technical mastery of her argument, combined with the raw emotional resonance, made the moment instantly iconic. Across the political spectrum, reactions were electric. Activists tweeted in celebration, organizers posted rallying cries, and grassroots volunteers saw a surge in engagement. Crockett's offices were inundated with emails from supporters, many sharing personal stories of being underestimated or dismissed in their own communities. They saw themselves in her resilience. They saw hope in her composure. Donors, long skeptical of investing in a newcomer challenging the status quo, took notice. Contributions began to spike, small dollar donations flooding in from all corners of the country. Political strategists marveled at the momentum. A single debate performance, delivered with authenticity and poise, had energized a base that many had assumed dormant. The ripple effects weren't limited to politics. Social media influencers, podcasters, and cultural commentators amplified the narrative. Clips of Crockett's performance were remixed, captioned, and shared in formats designed to go viral. Memes celebrated her calm defiance, GIFs immortalized her pauses, and TikTok compilations highlighted the subtle gestures that conveyed dominance without aggression. Even the general public, outside traditional political circles, felt the impact. People who had never followed congressional debates were now aware of Crockett. They discussed her with friends, shared the clips at work, and marveled at her ability to command authority without raising her voice. The debate became a cultural moment, a lens through which Americans reflected on merit, resilience, and the power of underestimation. By the end of the night, it was clear. The balance of influence had shifted. Murkowski, once the unchallenged figure of seasoned authority, now faced a challenger who had redefined expectations. Crockett had not only claimed victory on the debate stage, she had ignited a movement, energized supporters, and reshaped the conversation about leadership, credibility, and the future of American politics. Cliffhanger. But Crockett wasn't done. She used her closing words to reframe the entire debate, leaving the nation with a message no one could ignore. The cameras lingered on Jasmine Crockett as the debate stage quieted, the electric tension replaced by an almost reverent silence. She straightened in her chair, eyes sweeping across the room, across the nation, across millions of screens watching in real time. Then she spoke measured, steady, yet resonant with an authority earned through every struggle she had endured. Leadership, Crockett began, isn't about years served. It's not about titles, pedigree, or fitting the mold set by those who came before. Leadership is about the courage to serve with dignity, even when the world underestimates you, even when the odds seem insurmountable, even when those in power try to silence you. Her words carried weight because they weren't abstract. They weren't rhetorical flourishes designed to impress. They were lived truth. Every syllable echoed the countless late nights in law offices, the battles fought for the voiceless, the resilience honed through campaigns and courtroom victories. She had lived this, and the audience in the studio and at home felt it. Outsider voices matter, she continued. The perspectives we dismiss because they don't come from polished resumes or political dynasties often hold the most urgent truths. The courage to speak, the integrity to act, the resilience to persevere, these are the qualities that shape progress, not arrogance or entitlement. The moral clarity of her message hit with cinematic precision. Murkowski, who had leaned on decades of tenure, now sat silently, the echo of her own words reframed in Crockett's calm but devastating clarity. The contrast was undeniable. Entitlement versus authenticity, arrogance versus lived experience, dismissiveness versus dedication. Crockett didn't just frame a personal victory. She reframed the debate itself. She elevated it from political point, scoring to a universal lesson about power, humility, and responsibility. The room felt it, the press, the viewers, even the silent critics, that this was more than a clash of two politicians. This was a demonstration of principle triumphing over prestige, of courage overcoming condescension. Her voice rose slightly, the cadence carrying a subtle crescendo that resonated like a call to action. When we value authenticity over arrogance, courage over complacency, and service over self-interest, we redefine what leadership can be. Every individual has the power to challenge assumptions, to stand for justice, to insist that dignity matters more than hierarchy. The audience's reaction was immediate, not just applause, but an emotional resonance that felt collective. Viewers tweeted, posted, shared, and discussed, not because of a clever line, but because they recognized themselves in her words, because her triumph reflected the triumph of resilience, of truth, and of integrity. In that moment, the debate stage transformed. It wasn't a battlefield. It was a classroom, a rally, a mirror. It reflected the power of the underestimated, the strength of the overlooked, and the unstoppable momentum of those who refuse to be silenced. Crockett's message transcended